Season 1 of The Making of You with Deante Young is presented by Right. The worst part of your childhood would have been the invasion. I'm assuming that's got to be like the first main thing that happened to you. Tell me exactly how that happened and what your memories are.
That was horrible. It was on 1944, March 18th, my grandmother passed away. And Sunday, on the 19th of March, was the funeral. And when people were starting to come to the house to make their condolences, is when they found out that the Germans invaded Hungary. But some of the people were saying that how lucky my grandmother was that she didn't live through it. And I said, how can you say that? I mean, she just died. And my grandfather was very upset. He said, nothing worse can happen to us. He was kind of wrong.
So I gotta tell you, the way that I met Erika Gold, it was months ago by chance. I was at the Malta Museum, and as I was leaving, she was coming in. I noticed right away she had a great wit and sense of humor about herself. Now, I know that you were born in Budapest, Hungary, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that was what year?
1932.
1932, wow. So I can only imagine what the world was like at that time. Walk me through what you remember of your first memory in the world.
Actually, unfortunately, I was born 5 months before Hitler came to power. So my early childhood kind of depended on what he was doing, but he was only in Germany. Hungary was on the side of the Germans because our military helped their military. So they left us alone. But there was anti-Semitism in Hungary even before Hitler came to power. There was, in the schools, they would only take 2% of the student body could be Jewish. In universities, they wouldn't take Jewish in medical school, law school, or engineering. So I knew that as a little kid. And everything that was on the media was all propaganda. And I knew that as a little kid because my parents were listening to the Radio Free Europe, which was against the law.
And this was before television, correct?
Right.
Wow.
And I had to be very quiet, and I couldn't tell anybody. So I figured that wasn't a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I heard Hitler on the radio always shouting. And you didn't have to understand German to realize that whatever he was saying, it wasn't good.
Right.
He was always kind of angry. Mm-hmm. And now as I look back on videos and documentaries, and he's on, and I see that he was always seemed to be angry. Yeah. So whatever he was saying, it wasn't a good thing.
I know I had a lot of insecurities as a child, but I didn't really go through anything that was really life-altering from a standpoint of I'm going to lose relatives, I'm going to lose possibly myself, I'm going to be murdered. But when I think of Adolf Hitler, I can't imagine how that guy was able to walk the earth for as long as he did. How are you able to wrap your mind around someone that clearly is a dictator when you're a young child like that and your formation of the world is very, very limited at that point in time?
At that time, I could not imagine what actually happened. Mm-hmm. I knew he was a bad guy, but I had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
At that point, as a small child, in Hungary, I was the same as everybody else, and I could go wherever my parents wanted to take me. So I wasn't any different than any of the other kids. So in that respect, I was okay. Mm-hmm. But still, there was something in the air that was disturbing.
Right. This week's episode of The Making of You is presented by Forge Fitness. Most gyms have instructors. We have coaches. Now, you were raised by your parents?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any grandparents around? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that like?
My grandparents, my dad's family lived all in Budapest, which was great, and we visited them like every Sunday. My mother's parents lived in a small town close to the Czechoslovak border called Galanta. And that little town, when my mother was born, it was Hungary. When I was born, it was already Czechoslovakia. After the First World War, they changed a lot of areas, so it became Czechoslovakia. And we used to go there, and we needed a passport, which was no big deal. And then in 1938, Hungary got that area back. So then it was easier to travel because we didn't need a passport. But that was the only difference that I could see as a little kid.
Yeah, I can't even imagine living in a land like that where it just feels like there's constant danger, there's constant strife, and all of that kind of stuff. Were you able to at least have a normal childhood in terms of being able to play with friends or
Yes.
anything like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
when I was, yeah.
Okay. When it comes to your grandparents, I know my grandmother, she always had famous sayings. She would say, time brings about a change. She would talk about the Lord and say, when God is with you, he's more than the world against you. What quotes did you have in your life and your family that you remember to this day?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
Although I spent quite a bit of time with my, as I mentioned, my dad's family lived in Budapest, so we visited them every Sunday. But I was always very quiet, and I had older cousins, so I was kind of probably lost. But my mother's family, my grandfather would come the day after school was out and took me to their home, and I spent the whole summer every year there.
Wow.
So after it became Hungary again, because before that I was on my mother's passport, and I couldn't travel without her, and she couldn't travel without me.
Right. Okay, so obviously the worst part of your childhood would have been the invasion. I'm assuming that's got to be like the first main thing that happened to you. Tell me exactly how that happened and what your memories are.
That was horrible.
Season 1 of The Making of You with Deante Young is presented by Buy Right. Buy Right is proud to be the only Eastside showroom for both new and used office furniture. Additionally, they offer over 35,000 office products for next day delivery. They are locally owned and operated. Please visit buyrightoffice.com.
It was on 1944, March 18th, my grandmother passed away, my mother's mother. And we went there to Galanta for the funeral. And Sunday, on the 19th of March, was the funeral. And when people were starting to come to the house to make their condolences, is when they found out that the Germans invaded Hungary.
Wow.
So that was the 19th of March, 1944. And then everybody was very upset. And I couldn't understand what they're talking about, of course. Nobody could imagine. But some of the people were saying that how lucky my grandmother was that she didn't live through it. And I said, how can you say that? I mean, she just died, and my grandfather was very upset. He said, nothing worse can happen to us. He was kind of wrong, but so that's how I found out. So at that point, that was a Saturday, my grandmother passed away, and from Budapest we went to Galanta for the funeral, and my mother was going to stay for a week or so for the Shiva call, which is 8 days. And my dad was going to bring me home to Budapest to go back to school. So that didn't happen because he was afraid to take me too. People were being picked up at the train station, and so he went back to Budapest alone, and I stayed. As I mentioned, it was on the 19th of March. By the 1st of April, all the Jews had to wear a yellow star. Everything went very, very fast. By that time, they were very good at getting rid of people as easily, as fast as possible.
When you say get rid of people, what exactly do you mean by that?
Get them out of town, get them gassed. By that time, the gas chambers were going 24 hours a day. And so it was, but what they have done in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary in less than 2 months, which is hard to believe. But the Maltz Museum had an exhibit in 2016 about Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the architects of the final solution that happened in 1942. But he was in charge of the transports, and he was very good at his job. We had in the exhibit that the Maltz Museum had, there was a little plaque, a bronze plaque, that complimented him of being so efficient to transport 451,000 Hungarian Jews to the camp in less than 2 months. So it wasn't my word, it was theirs. He received that plaque November 1944. And that's what happened. I think it was like 56 days that they were able to transport all the Jews of Hungary from all the small towns and villages, except for Budapest, in less than 2 months. And they all went to Auschwitz.
Well, I mean, I feel like I don't know how I would have dealt with that if I was in that situation, especially being young like that. Did you feel like your world was coming to an end? Or, I mean, how could you possibly make sense of something like this?
I couldn't. I mean, it was going so fast, and we didn't know where these people were going. And it's interesting because they were taken on those cattle cars, and nobody talked about it. I mean, people who lived in the town saw it. They realized that these people are squeezed into these cattle cars, 80 to 120 people, and it was okay. Nobody talked about it. And Hungary doesn't want to take any responsibility for what happened. But without their cooperation, it could not have happened.
Now, when it comes to your family, you know, a lot of people have said that their family got separated and things like that. What did that happen for you?
Yes.
What exactly happened?
So in April already, see, we started just the middle of March. April, my dad had to close his store and report to a work camp, a forced labor camp that happened to be owned by Shell Oil. And we knew he was there. And then my grandfather and family, because they lived together with my aunt and two cousins, had to move out of their house because a German officer needed it. And they moved in with another family member. And my grandfather said, as long as they leave a roof over our heads, we'll be okay. And unfortunately, he was wrong on that too. And then we didn't hear from them until June. I don't remember the date, but it was sometimes in June when he sent a message that they're going to be taken out of town. So that's when I guess they were taken to Auschwitz. And because my grandfather was 75 at the time, and my aunt had two little kids, as we found out later, they were immediately gassed. They asked the professional photographers to send in that most Aryan-looking baby picture.
I wonder why.
Because they wanted to increase the Aryan people. And so this is the little girl that won. But she was Jewish.
And they didn't know it.
That's so funny.
And they actually came to the United States, and she was once on 60 Minutes. And so that's just a fun thing.
That's so funny.
Now this is just a picture of this one, a big one. The reason I have this, because this is a family snapshot. And the girl standing up, that's me. And I'm the only one that survived this grouping.
Oh my God.
So that's...
This is so historical. What year would this be?
That was in 42, or maybe 40.
Wow. When you're in those situations, and I know you had already been seeing Hitler on the or hearing about Hitler and all that kind of stuff, do you ever come to a point where you're saying, why can't they capture this guy or arrest him or something like that? I would feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, you would think that.
Yeah.
But I could not imagine what was happening. They were taken out of town, so they were taken somewhere.
Wow.
And they'll be back. And we couldn't imagine.
Whenever I'm in a really, really tough situation or a bad situation that scares me, I always try to find a happy place and think about what would I want to do to take my mind off of this. Were you able to do any of that at the time?
Not really, because of the fact that I didn't understand what was happening.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you really can't even tell where there's going to be an end to it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were hoping that it's going to blow over soon, but...
How many of your family got separated?
Actually, on my mother's side, I have a family tree, and 45 people were murdered in that 45 days period.
Wow, 45? I don't even know how you can ever cope with that or even come to grips with something of that level of evil.
Yeah. But on my dad's family, because of the way the family, he was the youngest of 7 kids, so all his brothers and sisters were older. There was only one brother that was close to his age, so they were the 2 that were taken in forced labor camp. But the others were left alone. They were stayed in their place, and because of Budapest was the capital city in a bigger town, they figured they'll have to deal with us separate. And so after all the other ones were already gone, they were going to do whatever they were going to do with us. And that's what gave me a slim chance of surviving, because of the fact that they haven't killed us yet.
This week's episode of The Making of You is presented by A Mother's Hopeless Prayer, A young mother received devastating news on March 17, 1994. The baby she carried for 8 months had a 1% chance of survival. This book describes a gut-wrenching race against time, Mother Nature, and modern medicine by a parent determined to see her child survive. A mother's hopeless prayer illustrates the power of relentless faith that will leave you filled with hope.
And then the Soviet Union was able to liberate.
You talk about they hadn't killed you. Did you feel like that was a great possibility that they could?
No. I mean, not at that time. I had no idea what their end was.
So how did you get, when did all of this start to, kind of lessen and you get out of that horrible, horrible circumstance?
When the Soviet Union liberated us, that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And we were hoping all the other people will be liberated and will come back. And as the Soviet Union was going west and the Allies were going east, liberating the different towns, countries, including the concentration camps, the people, when they were the ones that were able to survive, came back and told us what happened there and all the people that we can't expect to come back. So that's when it hit.
When you say liberated, what does that mean?
They came in and kicked the Nazis out. Actually, in Budapest, I don't know if you know, Budapest is made out of 2 cities, Buda and Pest. The Pest side is on the east side. That's where the army was coming from. And the Danube is in the middle and connected with bridges. And as the Soviet Union army was liberated, Pest side, the Germans blew up all the bridges on the Danube. And so it took them another 30 days to get to the other side so the city would be liberated, and then they kept on going west. But on the Pest side, because we were on the Pest side, and the ghetto was on the Pest side, we were okay. We were able to walk around hoping that all the Nazis are no longer in power. Now, in my head, even as a kid, I realized that if you were a Nazi yesterday, you're probably a Nazi today, too.
Yeah. I think the Holocaust is one of the most horrific calamities that could ever befall this nation or any other nation. And just the idea that people think that it didn't happen, to me, is just absolutely insane. What these people went through and endured, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case. When did life get some level of normalcy? What year would it have been when your life got back to, I guess, what you can consider to be normal?
It never really did. Mm-hmm. They started school, I think, in April or something like that. But it was not normal. And I remember some of the kids, the orphans that were found in camps, especially we had a pair of twins that they put in our class that wasn't there before. So they were in Auschwitz in Dr. Mengele's camp. And I could still see the fear in their eyes. We never asked them what happened because we knew that it must have been awful just the way they were so scared. But that opened my eyes a little bit how horrible the situation must have been to the people who were actually there.
Yeah, like I said, I can't even imagine things that I think is a big deal. This doesn't even compare to that.
Yeah.
I don't like to refer to Erika simply as just a Holocaust survivor because she is so much more than that. What I've come to realize is that she was a dedicated wife for over 60 years, a mother, a grandmother, a great grandmother. She is an educator. She is a public speaker. She is really a community activist, if you really want to be honest about it. What high school did you go to?
Here?
No, when you were, or did you came here?
Yeah, I went to high school here in Cleveland.
Really? So when
Cleveland
did you,
Heights High.
you're kidding me. Wait, when did you leave from overseas?
48.
1948. So at that point in time, you would have been, 16 years old?
15. Yeah.
15, 16? Okay. So you went to Cleveland Heights High School, and what did it feel like when you came to America for the first time?
Well, I was very happy. I mean, by that time, besides the fact that I had to learn English well enough to go to school, actually we left in 48 and we did not have the American visa yet, although my parents asked for it in 1936. And in 48, we still didn't, our number wasn't close. So the Cuban government was selling visas. And my dad said, if we buy the visas, we can go to Cuba, and we're out of Europe and closer to the United States. So that's what we did. 1948, May, we went to Cuba. And it took another 2 years before we got the American visa. So I actually got here 1950, and then I was able to go to Heights High, and I graduated in 1952.
That is absolutely incredible. When I think about the early 1950s, I'm thinking about television becoming a major powerhouse. You have I Love Lucy came out in 1951.
Yeah.
Even John F. Kennedy, who was not president yet, but he got married in 1953 to Jackie.
Yeah.
So that was really an interesting time.
You don't remember that.
Well, when you get to be my age, you kind of remember things here and there. But that's actually really interesting. What was it that made you guys want to come to America of all places? You could have went anywhere.
Actually, I had a very smart uncle who came in 1921. And so they already lived here. And then they were able to bring 48 people out to the United States. You had to have a sponsor who is, in case you don't get a job, they'll take care of you. So they had to sponsor us, and they lived. And by that time, my other uncle was here. They were in Czechoslovakia, and they got out 3 days after Hitler came to power. And by that time, that was in 1939 when they came, in March, April, yeah. And so there were 2 of them here, my mother's siblings. And my dad had 3 siblings in the United States by that time. So that's why we came here.
That makes a lot of sense. Did you come into the United States through Cuba? Is that how you got through here?
Yeah.
Okay. And where you came directly to Ohio?
Yes.
That's really interesting, because a lot of people have told me that they come through New York because New York was like this.
Right, because that's where the ships, Ellis Island, when we came, we had a 3-week transit visa to the United States. So we came with the ship to New York, and then we were in Ellis Island for 3 days. And then my aunt and uncle picked us up and brought us to Cleveland. So we stayed here for 3 weeks and then went to Cuba.
When I think of Ellis Island, I think about the Statue of Liberty, because when I was in 3rd grade, I had to do a book report. So I'm always thinking about the Statue of Liberty. What were your thoughts when you first saw?
That was great. I mean, we were so happy to see it.
Yeah, it's almost like, to me, I feel like, especially in your situation, it has to feel like, oh my God, I have
liberty, freedom.
Yes, and I'm renewed. Life is a completely different thing. That's really powerful. I think even Arnold Schwarzenegger says something like that when he first came to America. So you go to Cleveland Heights High School, you graduate in 1952. What did you decide to do after high school?
I always wanted to be a physician, which in 1952, women had a very hard time getting into medical school. Jewish women have a harder time to get to medical school. People who didn't have perfect grades also had a problem, which I didn't. I mean, I was lucky that I could pass the classes because of my language skills, which was not too good. So that was out. I didn't even try. But I liked the medical field, so I became a medical technologist.
Really?
I went to reserve.
What made you have the desire to want to be in that field?
I don't know, but my uncle was, maybe that's why as I was growing up, my uncle was going to medical school, and maybe that's got me going, but I was always interested in science, and I like to help people, so...
Yeah.
No, he was maybe 18 months old, probably 40 or 41. 41. This one just shows, this is about my uncle, and it shows the detail, the handwritten neatly. Everybody had to have a registration card like this.
Wow.
And so when they say it didn't happen, they documented everything.
You didn't mention that wasn't your uncle who wrote that out neatly. It was the
Right,
German
I mean, it
to
was,
make
yeah,
sure
that's
that
what
everybody knew for sure.
they documented. And the worst part about this paper is that this is from the Red Cross, because we didn't know what happened to him. And they got it up to this camp.
Wow.
But nobody ever heard of it. Nobody ever mentioned it. I had no idea what that camp was.
One thing I notice about all of us is that we all have some type of influence when we're younger, and sometimes we don't realize how influential that is. For example, I was a big, huge fan of Michael Jackson when I was a young kid, and I just thought, wow, Michael is so amazing because the way he presents himself, he's different, he's unique. And so I felt like he gave me permission to be different and unique myself.
Okay.
So did you have anyone that you looked up to, whether it was on television, a celebrity, or anyone that, a book that you were inspired by in any way, shape, or form?
I don't think so. I always volunteered, even in elementary school. If anything had to be done or taken to the office or whatever, I always volunteered. So I don't know I don't know where that came from.
Well, it's obvious that you have this mentality of being, a servant, being of service to people. And that's one of the most noble things that they always talk about is, they always say things of that nature. And it could very well be something that you saw, surreptitiously through your parents,
I don't know. I don't remember that.
You just say, look, I just know what I want to be, and that's it.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a physician.
Well, that's interesting. Did you think about, I want to start a family?
Yes.
At what point did you think of that?
Always.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that belongs in this podcast, but we had a housekeeper whose husband left her with a 1-year-old child. And she didn't have education, and women didn't really work that much in fields. So the only thing she could do was housework. So she came to us, and she hated men. She really detested them. And that came through, and I spent a lot of time with her. She was a great person. And she always, she made me know that how awful men are. But I saw my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. they were not that bad.
Yeah.
So when I was little and I didn't know what was going on too much, I always wanted kids. I loved little kids. But I had to get married in order to have my kids.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you can have them without getting married. but yeah, she influenced me a lot, but it didn't stick.
So in other words, you went your own way and said, I'm going to go and get a husband.
Yeah.
So how'd you meet your husband?
That was interesting too. I was at reserve and I had a friend. We were lab partners. And this one day I called her because I had a question about our homework. And she wasn't home. And this guy answered the phone. Turns out it was her brother. And he was a little older. And he says, "Oh, I already had that class. I can help you." And he came over and he helped me with my chemistry, and the rest is history.
Oh, wow. No wonder I could never get girls because I was never smart. So I couldn't just say, hey, that's such a great idea. Like, wow. So this is the person that you married.
Yes.
So he must have got like a really good grade then.
By that time, he finished his master's degree in microbiology.
What's his name?
Richard Gold.
Richard Gold. When did you guys get married?
1956. Yesterday would have been our 70th anniversary.
Wow, really? 1956. Yeah, that's really interesting. And by now, are you still living in Cleveland Heights?
No, in Beechwood.
So you were living in Beechwood even in 1956?
No, I mean 1956. We lived in Barnesville Heights. We moved.
Okay.
Had a little house there.
Okay, so that's interesting. Now, how many kids did you have?
2.
2. Well,
He's the baby.
So, what did being a wife teach you that parenthood didn't, or vice versa?
Actually, I knew what I was getting into.
Really?
It's at the very beginning, I worked full time, but when I had my kids, most of my married life, we lived with my parents. Mm-hmm. Because when we built a house in Warrensville Township, and they sold their house, and before they got another one, we said, why don't you move in? We had 3 bedrooms, no kids yet. And so that's what happened. And then we just got stuck.
Oh.
Then my daughter was born, and it was a very good experience that we were all together, and the kids had like 2 sets of parents.
So your daughter is your oldest?
Yeah.
What was new motherhood like for you?
Oh, I loved it. It was great. I had no problem with dealing with either one of them.
How are you able to manage the things that happened earlier in your life, while you were going through marriage? Because now, that's, in the past, but it has to still affect you at all times, or at least be in there somewhere.
I mean, it did, but I tried not to show it. We always talked about it. I wasn't one of those people that kept it a secret. At certain levels, my kids knew that something happened, and as they got older, they knew more and more. And although both of them are kind of involved with what happened, I mean, they know. My daughter is more involved. She goes to meetings, and she's more involved with teaching about the Holocaust.
How did you like marriage?
Oh, I loved it. It was good.
And the reason why I say that is because for me, I never thought I would get married. To be honest with you, I used to tell people, listen, I am not marriage material, right? But, I just got married last year. And my wife, I met her 6 years ago.
Wow.
And got married last year, you can see here.
Very nice.
And the thing is that I say that she made herself undeniable, because there is no way that I would have even committed on any level to someone if they were something completely out of the norm of regular things. So that's why I ask you about that, because so many people have different opinions of marriage.
I mean, you have to kind of give and take, and you have to be patient, and you don't know that person well enough. And actually, we were engaged for a year and a half because he was in the army. So he wasn't even here most of the time. He came once a month to visit. But it was okay. We got to know each other, and
you got married young. You were 23, 24 years old, right? Yeah, that's even more
that's
amazing.
normal.
And see, I'm old as the hills, It's like when I was 23 and 24, I was thinking about like quantity. That's what I was thinking about, But that's really, really powerful. How many years had you guys been, have you been married, before he?
62.
62 years. Wow. You can write a book about marriage then. But I feel like because I obviously got married older, I feel like that I've learned a lot of things.
Yeah, but it's different when you're older, because you already had your life, and you lived on your own.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes me be able to be so committed and so dedicated.
That's great.
Because I can admit that I was extraordinarily self-centered, But I'll always ask you for advice on things, but, trust me. So, don't be wondering, like knocking on the door and I'm like, hey, I have a question.
Go ahead.
But it's really interesting. Now, your career, did you actually get a sustainable career in the medical field?
Yes, I worked full-time before I had my kids. And then I worked part-time. Because it's interesting, because you asked if anybody in for you. There is always somebody that says something that sticks.
Yeah.
I was working with this lady who was quite a bit older than me. She had one son, is all grown up. And she said, you can't work when you have kids, but make sure you're home when they come back from school. It's not that you deny that you're working, but you need to be there. And that's what I did. I worked, like when he went to kindergarten, I put him on the bus and went over to the hospital and asked for the job. And I worked till he came back from school. And then we had to change school systems. So then we had carpooled. So I was always home like 2 o'clock before I had to pick him up.
The woman that said that to you, who was she?
She was a technologist. She worked in the lab.
And this was probably back in the 50s? Or 60s?
60, probably. 60.
When was your firstborn?
61.
61, okay. So this has been like 65 years since this was said to you, and it sticks with you. And that brings me to a very interesting question, is that, we all have people like mentors, like I said, that, give us, advice and things like that, change our direction. Your husband would certainly be one of them, because obviously he changed your life in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And then also this woman you're talking about, are there other people that you can think of that, came into your life and made a big difference in your life? Strangers, mentors, coworkers?
Not really. I mean, it did, because whatever happened, I walked into a lab after I finished school and got myself a job. And that was the only time I asked for a job. And the others just came because people, like it was an interesting, I worked in the, excuse me, the Cedar Fairmont Medical Building, that big building on the corner. And there was a Mr. Siegler. It was a Siegler and Sons builders in Cleveland. And the father was the big boss. And he used to come in the lab and we used to talk. And then they built a medical building at Southgate. And he had a son. He always used to call him my poor pathologist son because the others were all builders. So he had this pathologist son who they gave the laboratory in the medical building. And he needed somebody to start the lab. So he gave my phone number to his son. His son called me up. So I got a job at Southgate Medical Building.
Wow.
And that was a great job because it was setting up the lab and going shopping. It was terrific. And then I had my kids, and this young man was born, and he didn't want to sleep the night through for a long time.
Oh, you mean your son?
Yeah. And there was a suburban hospital was practically across the street from us. And the pathologist there needed some workers. And Dr. Siegler gave him my phone number, knowing that I lived across the street. But I could not. I said, but as soon as he sleeps the night through, I'm coming over. So when he went to kindergarten, by that time he slept the night through. I went over and I said, here I am, and I got a job. So, and I stayed there for 25 years. And I retired in 97. And this last year at the World Federation Conference, I found out from the guy from the U.S. Holocaust Museum that this camp was a death camp. So as soon as people got there, they got murdered. And he was like 32 years old.
That's devastating.
This is so-called Schutzpass that is from the Swiss government. Neutral country diplomats were trying to save some of the Jews. And it actually saved my dad.
I see it says 1944.
Yeah.
Whew. Man.
And this is just, my dad was in a forced labor camp at Shell Oil. They had a refinery near Budapest, and that's where my dad was working. And this part is a factory where they made soldier uniforms. And my mother and I was there.
What year was your son born?
63.
63. Speaking of 63, tell me about November 22nd, 1963. I know.
I was in the hospital.
When was your son born in 63?
The 16th.
November 16th?
Yeah.
Wow. So 6 days before the assassination of JFK,
Yeah.
your son was born.
Yep. Was still in the hospital.
That's unreal.
That was unreal. That was.
So, what was your reaction? You and your husband, like, what was that? I mean, especially with a newborn.
I mean, I was kind of. Our family has 13 girls and 1 boy. He was number 2, and it was very important to have a son. So he was born, and that was great. And then when Kennedy got killed, my first thought was, now I have to have a boy and he has to go in the army. Now, he wasn't old enough at that point to go to the army. But that was my first thought. I was very upset.
That is truly remarkable. What are the odds? What are the odds? Wow.
Yeah. And it's funny because the kids that were born around then, they were all called John. Now, he already had a name because he was 5 years old. But some of the other ones who didn't, they were all Johns.
Wow. Wait, his name's John?
No.
Oh,
That's what I mean, that he's Alan.
Okay.
He
That's awesome. Wow. That's powerful. With regard to any friends that you've had or people that know you well, what would they say about your personality? Would they say that you are, caring, giving, thoughtful, or, a task driver or anything like that? I ask that because it has everything to do with how you show up in the world. And I'm just curious as to what people would say about your personality.
I'm trying to be friendly and be patient with people. It's not that I like everybody, because not everybody is nice.
Right.
But I hope that people think of me as a caring individual.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people will, because somehow, some way, you're able to overlook the things that you've dealt with, and instead of just being a lifetime of sadness or bitterness. And that's not easy to do. So I give you a lot of credit for that. Is there anything that you have experienced in your life that was like a private battle, like it was, whether it was alcoholism or envy of other people or low self-esteem or any type of marital troubles or anything like that?
The only problem I had a hard time having my daughter.
Really?
But that took a while,
Really?
But it happened.
That made you obviously stronger.
I don't know.
Right. Have you ever looked at other people and said, if they only knew what I went through, they would be more grateful? Because a lot of people are ungrateful in this world and feel like that the world owes them something.
I mean, this whole generation is more, I don't know what the word is, but it's
Entitled?
that expect more.
Yeah.
And has less patience. But otherwise, I mean, there are a lot of caring people. Unfortunately, we hear more of the people who do bad things than good things.
Yeah.
But there are more decent individuals who care about other people. I believe that.
And speaking of caring about other people, you started becoming a speaker and telling your story. And at what point did that happen? Because, sometimes people are afraid to just go out and be a public speaker. Sometimes people say that's the hardest thing to do. What was the match?
Actually, it was when I retired. See, in my profession, we work during the day. And that's when schools needed people to talk. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, people really did not ask too many questions. And it took a while until they realized that the schools have to teach. And they should invite Holocaust survivors while they're still alive. So it kind of came together. And I had a friend who was teaching at Kinston High School. And she invited me to come to her classes. She had a whole semester of Holocaust education. And so I used to go out to her classes. And that was very interesting because she had a son. She has a son who lives in England, in Bristol, and he was teaching the Holocaust also there. And somehow the technology caught up to the point where I could talk to, in Bainbridge, where the school is, and to the kids in England,
Wow.
which was very interesting.
What year was that when you first did that?
97, 98, because I retired in 97.
So you've been doing this for almost 30 years. Oh, that, I consider that to be a public service. And also, I think that all of our formations, I feel like that not only is this beneficial for your heirs, but it's also a public inheritance, is what I call it. Because now your story becomes a part of the lexicon, so to speak. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
And unfortunately, there are still people who don't believe it, which is unbelievable.
They don't believe it happened?
Yeah.
Governor Mike DeWine, you remember that event we were at on May 12th? He was saying his father was in that. I don't know if you know him personally, but
No, I don't.
it was, I can't imagine someone just thinking someone is lying about something like that, just like they do about 9/11.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
insane.
And even the little kids that were killed in the school shooting, and this guy goes around and he said they made it up. I mean, that's unbelievable.
That's devastating. What is your greatest skill?
Skill?
Skill.
I don't know, maybe being patient.
Now that is a skill.
And I don't sweat the small stuff. Trying not to.
How do you feel you developed that skill of patience, given the fact that you've had so much unrest, so to speak, in your life?
Maybe that's why, because all the horrible things that happened that you need to be more understanding and grateful.
Yeah. And I know that the Moss Museum is going to honor you with that interactive, what is it?
Biography.
Yes. What do you want your enduring legacy to be?
Just for people to remember that it happened and how it happened and why it happened and the history and the fact that there is so much false news. And it's not easy, but you have to separate the propaganda from reality.
Wow. Well, I tell you, I'm very grateful for your presence. You are exceptional. Just to even have the disposition that you have, it's very meaningful to me, and I get excited. I was telling my wife, I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to call Erika right now." It's like you're like a celebrity to me.
Yeah, I just want to tell you an interesting story that my son reminded me of during the Holocaust when we were in Budapest, but we had to move out of our old apartment because they designated certain buildings where Jews could live and others were off limits. So we had to move. And at that point, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a family, not a person, a family. And to make it even worse, the way they counted the rooms, if you had one bedroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a bath, that was 4 rooms. So four whole families had to occupy that space. And at that time I was 11, and it was very boring. The grown-ups didn't talk to the kids. There was no school. We didn't know what was going on, and I was very bored. And this one day, I decided to rebel. I don't know who I was going to rebel against, but I took off my yellow star. I didn't tell a soul. I knew there was a pastry shop about 2 houses down from the street, and I went there and I bought myself an ice cream cone. And as I was eating the ice cream cone, I realized that if anybody finds out would recognize me, I could be shot on the spot. I knew that much. But as it turned out, nobody recognized me. And on the way back, I promised myself never, ever to do anything reckless like that. And my parents never found out that I did that. But, and then we were, after we were in this building, there was a time when the Nazis realized that some of the Jews are still alive in Budapest, so they called up all the women of working age because the men were already in some kind of a camp situation. So my mother had to go to a big sporting arena, and that's where this paper came. And that's where everybody had to be registered, and it took them a long time. So when they decided that it was too many people and they can't finish, they told the women, to whoever is not registered, to go home. And so they went. So my mother was fortunate not to be registered. She came home, but decided that if they call her, she's not going back. She has to think of something else. And that's when we found out that we got on this, went to the factory where they're making soldier uniforms, hoping that they'll save us. But that didn't happen. And while we were there, my mother got a message from my dad that they're going to be taken out of town, and she was able to get him paper from the Swiss government, and that actually got him out of the train and was able to get to the ghetto at that point. And then 2 weeks after we went to the factory that was supposed to save us, the Nazis took us away. And when we arrived at this big marketplace, the Nazis said nobody should get off the trucks or get out of line. My mother and I were in a truck, and when it stopped, my mother jumped off, and I jumped after her, and we walked away. And that's how I survived. And then we went into hiding, and the housekeeper that hated men is the one that saved us.
Wow. Well, that right there, that's a person that changed your direction right there. I mean, that's, wow.
That's in a nutshell, yeah.
That's like almost like a 1 in a million situation.
Yeah. I mean, everybody who survived has a completely different experience. And that's the only way you could survive. Somebody had to help.
Yeah, I mean, because it seems like if it wasn't for other people helping, it's just like a lost cause.
Yeah.
Doomsday. That's incredible. I am so grateful for you, and you've served a lot of people over really your whole life, but over the past almost 30 years of speaking. I wish that you had come to my school, but I'm old as the hills. You would have never been able to come there back then, way back in the 40s.
Oh.
But thank you so much.
Sure.
My final thoughts on Erika Gold is that she is absolutely a community treasure. And I wish that I could have met her a long time ago because her spirit is so pure. And she is unvarnished in what she says. She did not let the horrific nature of her childhood bring her down, and she made herself an incredible life. And for that, she needs to be commended. And she has perfectly left us a public inheritance that we can all live by. Erika, I love you, I salute you, and you are a phenomenon.